Welcome to Obsession Engineering. This is a Yamaha MT07 and at £7,200 it is a bargain of a motorbike. But there are of course a few little setbacks with a bargain. The owner of this 2020 bike enjoys the engine and the chassis but is not sold on the suspension. So today we're going to take a look at improving it. When building a budget bike, the manufacturers almost always save money on suspension, and they have definitely done that here. So the forks are pretty standard, but completely unadjustable. Down the back end, you actually have a preload adjuster, and on the other side of the shock there is a rebound adjustment. But it has been built down to a price, and I'm guessing that means a long way down to a price. So the plan today is to go and give the bike a little bit of a ride and see if I can find the same faults that the owner finds, and then I'm going to replace the shock and the fork internals with some Bitubo items. So to give a little demonstration of what the bike does as standard, I'm going to give it a bit of a bounce. So you can see there, when I push down on it, it pushes down quite fast, it comes back quite quickly, and you can actually feel it nearly pick the front wheel off the floor. There is not a lot of control in there. The rear feels very soft, but it does feel reasonably controlled. But the real trick will be to see what it feels like on the move. As a bit of a comparison, this is my ZX6. Now it might be 18 years old, but it has got some upgrades already. I've revalved the forks and I fitted a Maxton rear shock a few years ago. So this, admittedly considerably firmer than the MT07, rides really accurately on the road. So let's see what this is like on a push test. So not overly hard at the front, but you can see there is control in the way it dives and more accurate, more importantly, when it comes back. So that is a really nice setup. Now that you can see is considerably firmer than the Yamaha. Really a bit on the firm side for road use, if I'm honest, but you can see the control. This rides and recovers over bumps really well. So I don't want to make the MT07 as firm as this, but I would like it to have some of the road manners that this has, so the suspension moves and recovers like this. So I jump on the MT07 and start by a short little run to get out of town, and straight away I can tell why people like these bikes. The bike feels small and light and fun and perky, and admittedly the throttle connection is a little bit sharp, but once you get past that initial off onto the throttle at low revs, it's absolutely fine. Out on the open road, and I'm still enjoying myself. The bike turns really nicely, and it's got a little bit of zip to it. I'm quite enjoying this. But it doesn't take long before I start finding the problems. I didn't expect a lot of support from the forks on the brakes, and when I hit the brakes, I was correct. The forks basically just disappear to nothing, and they don't give you a lot of feedback. And that's with the decidedly lacklustre brakes on the MT07. Not quite sure what brake pads Yamaha have put in them, but I think they might be made of wood. The problems only get worse once we show the bike any bumps at all. The front goes over them relatively well because it's so soft, but the back of the bike just transmits the shocks straight through me. Considering that the bike felt relatively soft at standstill, I'm not quite sure how they've managed to make it so jarring over the bumps. Over little bumps and little ripples, it's just a bit jiggly and sort of a little bit uncomfortable, but as soon as you get any real size bumps, it's really quite unpleasant. And to me, it spoils the whole ride. As I head into a few nice sweeping corners, the front of the bike just lacks a little bit of feel, doesn't really give me any confidence to go any quicker, and the rear just feels hard and harsh. It's not really giving me the fun ride I was looking for. It doesn't take long before I'm really quite tired of the ride quality on the bike. I'm very disappointed that Yamaha released a bike that has so much potential, and yet they've clutched defeat from the jaws of victory by giving it such poor suspension. So it's fair to say, it's a thumbs down from me. So now that the disappointing road test is complete, the little Yamaha is on the bench, and I've put it on an ABBA stand because using that I can get all the weight off the swinging arm, so basically the shock is sort of free to come out of the bike. But before I can take the shock out, I need to take the hugger out. And there's 2 bolts on this side which are easy to get to, and then there's a bolt on the other side which is on the inside of the swinging arm, so I need to take the back wheel out first. Only an extra little bit of faff. So with the hugger out of the way, I can get to the bolt at the bottom of the shock, and the one at the top of the shock is actually quite easy to get to anyway. So all I need to do now is undo the nuts, slide the bolts out, and then the shock will be free to come out. I have put a normal paddock stand under the swinging arm so that when I take the shock bolts out, the swinging arm is relatively supported. It's not going to pull on any cables or hoses or anything like that. So we're going to take this one out, slot the new Bitubo shock in, and while I'm in there I will check the greasing in sort of there. So that is the original shock out. That's pretty straightforward to do, and that is getting replaced by this. This is a Bitubo XZE rear shock, and in effect is actually the sort of budget end of the Bitubo shock options. So this one has spring preload adjustment, some rebound adjustment at the bottom, and actually has a length adjustment at the top. So before I fit it, I'm just going to double check that this shock is the same length as this one, so we have the same geometry in the bike, and then we're just going to bolt this one in exactly how that one came out. And as if by magic, that is the shock fitted. It is actually pretty easy on one of these. Right, it's nice and easy to get to the adjustment in there for preload. There is a little tool in the box for that, and you can get to the damping adjuster down there nice and easily. So that end is sorted. So I've taken the ABBA stand out and just put the bike back on normal paddock stand. So I've got a Harris headstock stand in the front, which actually isn't really long enough because they're quite long forks in this, and the front wheel was just off the floor, wasn't really far enough off. So a couple of little bits of wood, and that is considerably better, so I can now start taking all this apart. So what I need to do here is take the brake calipers off, take the front wheel out, take the mudguard off, and then if I just undo the clamps that hold the yokes, everything could just slide out the bike nice and easily. What I have done already is loosened off the top yoke clamp and then just cracked off the fork top, so it's easier to do them in the bike. These ones weren't particularly tight, so it wouldn't have been a problem to do them later. Some of them can be quite stiff. So relatively straightforward to get the forks out of this. Mudguard, brakes, front wheel out, yokes undone, slide the forks out. So I've moved upstairs to my suspension area, and the first thing I'm going to do with the standard legs is give them a bit of a clean. Make sure there's no pitting on anything, make sure there's no damage or anything like that, and then I'm going to take them apart. So it's take the fork caps off, turn them upside down and let the oil drain out of them for a while, and then in the bottom of the fork leg, up the hole, there is a bolt that holds the cartridge in, or the damper in. So we're going to take that out, drain everything even longer, so we've got none of the old oil and bits in there, give them a bit of a clean out inside, and then we can fit the new internals. So these are the new JBH Bitubo cartridges. These are pressurised cartridges, and if we look at the top of this one, this leg, which is the right hand leg, will be doing the rebound, and they both have preload adjustment on them as well. They are sprung to suit the rider from the factory, so I don't need to worry about spring rates and bits on them. These will be excellent. So I have the first fork leg draining into the sink. It's not blood, it's just the world's most red fork oil. So those are the bits out the standard one. These are not cartridge fork standard, these are damper rods. So that's part of the reason the damping isn't brilliant in them. So I've cracked off the bolt that's in the bottom of the fork leg already, because it's sometimes easier when you've got the springs and bits in because it holds a bit of tension on it. And then if we move to the other end, the next thing to do is take that top cap off. So these forks, they're not too bad, but on some forks there can be quite a lot of spring pressure trying to push that off, so you've got to be a bit careful when you take the big bolt out. So that is, the top cap is off, and then you've just got a spring spacer, and then down there is the spring and washer and bits that are over there. So what I'm going to do next is just tip that over the sink, pour all the blood away, and leave it to drain for a few minutes. So I've now undone the bolt that lives up the bottom of here. So now what I can do is split all this, get the original sort of damper bits out of it, get the top out spring out that I actually do need to reuse, and then we can start reassembling. So this is the bit that sits in the bottom of the standard fork and generates a very small amount of damping. Basically this bolts into the sort of the black bit at the bottom of the fork and goes up and down when the wheel goes up and down, and oil pushes through these big holes and generates not very much damping. This is crap. There is no other way of putting it. This is the cheapest thing you could put inside of the fork to make it even do anything that wasn't a pogo stick. So that is crap and will not be getting used again. this is the standard top-out spring, so that when you go over big bumps or if you wheelie the bike, the forks don't go metal to metal, so we're going to be reusing that. And this is one of our new cartridges. This is the compression leg. So this is quite a lot different. So the fork top, which obviously attaches to the chrome bit at the top of the fork, we have that. Then we have the big spring. We have preload adjustment up here. There is damping adjustment as well. And basically when this goes up and down, this sort of bronze rod here, that's your sort of damper rod, that goes through some seals in here, and that sits in here with a shim stack on it. So it's got a little piston that goes through the oil, and when the oil is pushed through the piston, it can either go through a little bypass which is attached to the adjuster at the end, or if it goes a little bit faster and it can't flow anymore through there, it has to go through the shim stack. So basically, depending on how fast the fork moves, depends on how much damping you get. It is an excellent system and it is fitted to almost everything new. These ones are obviously very good quality, so this will give a much, much better ride. So that's the forks now rebuilt with their fancy internals in them. I haven't gone into too much details of how you actually fit this stuff, because it has to actually be fitted by an authorised Bitubo service centre. So they are now fitted and ready to go back in the bike. Back downstairs in the workshop, and I've just slid the forks just basically into the bike to begin with and just given them a little nip up. Before I took them apart, I did check the fork height, and we've set them at the same position, so the geometry of the bike will be the same. So they're just nipped up for now. I will torque them up in a minute, and then I just need to put the front wheel, the mudguard and the brakes back on it, and we'll have a complete bike again. That's all the front end put back together. The rear end is ready to go. So the next thing to do is take it off the bench and go and test ride it. So before I put my riding kit on and see what the MT's like on the road, I thought we'd have a look at the static setup. Now you'll remember the forks before were very soft and basically pogo sticks. And you can see there's just so much more control to the forks. Yes, they are a little bit firmer, but if the compression damping and rebound damping is working correctly, they'll actually ride nicer on the road. That is a massive improvement over standard. So that still feels nice and soft, but there's definitely more control to it. So it's time to put some riding kit on and see what it's like on the open road. So I set off for a test run down my usual test ride route. Now this route's got a little bit of town use, some open fast flowing road, and some sort of bumpy little back roads, so it gives us a good combination of every kind of road you're going to ride. Let's start at the back of the bike. The rear shock used to be the worst bit of the bike by miles, and now it's miles better. Where it used to magnify the bumps and really shock everything through the seat and up into your spine, now you still know the bump is there, but it's softened, it's taken the harsh edges off everything, and it's just so much more controlled. Because the bike is quite light, you're never going to get it where it floats perfectly over the bumps. So yes, you can still feel they're there, but they're not a problem, they're not hard to you, and they don't make the ride tiring. So it just proves that the shock is working as a rear shock should actually work. The rear shock might be the most notable improvement, but it's the front of the bike that I actually feel has gained me the most. Where the forks used to be really, really soft and lacked any feedback, now, when I brake, I've got something to sort of push against, a little bit of resistance. And there's so much more control to it that I can feel what the front wheel's doing, and it just gives me confidence to enter corners quicker, and I feel like I can put the bike where I want it more. To me, the rear shock has fixed the problem, but the front of the bike has fixed something that almost wasn't a problem before. A hidden advantage of having both the front and the back done, of course, is that now the spring rates and the dampers are actually equal at both ends. And it means the bike moves at both ends equally, so that in the middle of a corner the geometry sort of stays where it's supposed to be, because the both ends are doing the same thing. And that makes it much more predictable. I know where I'm going to end up, so therefore I can go into the corner quicker if I want. And it builds this confidence into the ride that really, really helps. And all of a sudden, we've ended up with a bike that is actually fun to ride. This is the Yamaha that Yamaha should have built to begin with. So that's the test ride of the MT07 done, and there are some definite improvements. Where the rear shock used to just be
abusive to you. Now it's kind to me. Yes, I can still feel what's coming through from the road, I can still feel the bumps, I still know what's going on, but now it's feedback, not abuse. And especially because I took a little bit of damping out of it, made it a little bit softer during the ride, and that made a difference straight away, made an actual difference to how the bike rides. And then it was really, really nice down a bumpy road, and then on the faster, smoother, sweeping roads, it was still really good. So the shock is a really big improvement. The front of the bike, that when I actually originally rode it, I had no massive problem with, now that's actually my favourite bit of the bike, because it's just given me so much more control and so much more confidence that I know what the front tyre is doing and I know how the bike's going to react. So I've got more confidence to enter corners a little bit quicker, and when I brake, I've got something to push against when I brake, so now I can brake harder on it as well. And because the front of the bike and the back of the bike now work together, there's just a balance to it. It is sort of that almost inconceivable bit where it's just better. It just builds confidence. And now the whole bike is fun, which is the whole thing with motorbiking. It should be fun. And now everything works together. The engine's peppy, the throttle's kind of fun, and now we've got suspension that lets the rest of the bike be fun as well. So that's it. It is an MT07 Fixed.
Thanks for watching. If you could like and subscribe, that would be brilliant. And if you'd like us to improve your bike, drop us a message through the website at obsessionengineering.co.uk.